It's going to be an exciting year for WITBE, and we've got lots to share with you. I'm going to make a couple of announcements before I introduce Thea. Unfortunately, Liz couldn't join us today. She's ill, got a bad bout of flu, so I'm your host for today. We had a lot of registrations from all over Africa, and we had one from New Zealand, but I can't see them here because it's 1 in the morning in New Zealand. But welcome to everybody from Zambia, Malawi, Namibia, Kenya, Lesotho, and welcome to Mercy, who's our new ambassador for Ghana. Very exciting new members that have joined us. Our next goal is to reach 1,000 members by mid-year. We're just over 700. So please encourage your colleagues, your female members of your groups to join the built environment, WITBE, and the WITBE movement. It's there for everyone. It's free for everyone in sub-Saharan Africa. And we'll be linking you this year with international mentors from across the UK and Europe. And I'm currently in discussion with the leaders of the Women in Construction Awards. Louise, would you put in the chat, I think you have the link to join with WITBE. So anyone that's on the webinar today and you haven't yet registered for WITBE, we invite you to participate and be part of the conversation on the WITBE app. The second thing is please watch your inbox for the next live training for the app. The app is a very specific app. It's not around chit chat or WhatsApp. It's very much about a learning space. There are knowledge themes within the app where you can ask questions and share with each other learning experiences and really gain knowledge and build your network. One of the important updates on the app is recency, which means that if somebody has asked a question from last week or last month and you happen to read it because you haven't been on the app for some time and you respond, it will come to the top of the feed. So it will be much more dynamic and it will help us see what are the active themes on the app and what is sort of the quieter areas. In February, we're welcoming our new WITBE patron, and she's going to be our speaker, who is Zama Ngobo. She's a construction lawyer, an international speaker and lecturer, and she's also a board member of the International Building Quality Centre. So please keep an eye out for that as well in your emails, and you'll get those emails if you are a registered WITBE member. Anything I've forgotten? I don't think so. I think that should be it. So let me welcome today's speaker, which we're very honored to have, Thea Weeks. Thea is from MPAMOT. She's the leading ESG technical advisor, and she's an ESG partner to asset and portfolio companies in Africa. She's also the vice chairperson of the IAP, which is the International Association for Public Participation, which was established in 2011. And IAP2 SA, South Africa, is a network of committed practitioners raising awareness and standards of public participation. So over to you, Thea. Welcome, Thea, and please pop any questions you might have in the chat or write them down to share at the end of Thea's presentation.
Thank you for that, Shelley. I appreciate the warm welcome. I just want to make sure that everybody is able to see my screen. Is that visible?
All good.
Yeah. Wonderful. So I just want to welcome everybody today. I know depending on where you are globally, it's different times, so I'm just going to give a hearty welcome to everybody. And I really want to thank Shelley and Tom and Louise for all the work behind the scenes to establish this and make this such a phenomenal success. We're really fortunate to partner with the Knowledge Mentoring Global and SciC and all partners. So really from our side, thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to, with your permission, jump right into today's discussion. So today we want to speak about enhancing diverse, equitable and inclusive infrastructure development. And I think the big question we have to face ourselves is this an aspirational vision, or is it part of our DNA and our ethos? And I'm not sure how many of you, maybe you want to just give a thumbs up or have a show of hands. But I grew up with a grandmother that used to tell me endless stories and fables and tales. So I think in order to set the tone for diversity, equity, and inclusion, I want to tell you a quick tale of two young girls. The one grew up in a very rural setting, went to school, had lovely aspirations, really was strong in science and maths. And with that grew the love for engineering and being part of solutions in a rural setup. And with that, she then went to go and study. And be it as it may, she was the first Black female that has finished in civil engineering within her university. And then she went abroad and she had exposure. And then she thought, but all of this that we are learning can be plowed back into Southern Africa and into Africa and globally. There's such a wealth of experiences growing up in South Africa that we have because we are such a diverse nation that she wanted to plow back and spearheaded change and development within that sector. And I think all of you know already that I'm speaking about Malini Fadachi-Saman, our CEO, is also on the call. And she has spearheaded diversity, equity, inclusion in this infrastructure development for more than 26 years now. And I want to build on that ethos, bringing the engineering, bringing the development with my own ethos, where I grew up in an apartheid era where my mom spoke Zulu fluently, and wherever we went, my mom always overstepped a boundary because she was always correcting people if she saw lack of inclusion, biases coming up, and poor treatment and oppression of people. So she believed that your voice and your story and the way you have an impact depends on you. Every day you can make a choice, every day within your own business, within your own workforce, but also within the projects that you're working in. There's choices on each of those projects, and it's how you sell it, how you bring it across. And I think that is what has inspired me then to be, as you say, be part of the Public Participation Association. But apart from that, also then to at MPAMOT to lead ESG and communication, because without engaging with stakeholders and a wide range of stakeholders, we are not able to actually develop a diverse, inclusive, and equitable projects. So a lot of people are asking, but why is diversity, equity, and inclusion important? And I want to just highlight that we are signatories to the United Nations Women's Empowerment Principles. I know many of you that have joined the call today are. But apart from those that are signatories to the UN, most companies that I have worked with in the past, engineering firms, sustainability firms, clients, are all committed to making a difference and making a contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. The landscape in which we operate has changed significantly. The awareness about the needs to have inclusive development has expanded and grown over several years. Now, a lot of you have given me a call and said, oh, well, Thea, I'm so excited about this discussion, but I'm not really clear on what is meant with diversity, what is meant with equity, what is meant with inclusion. And I think that is also the purpose of today, so that we can really just have a pause, take a breath, and start this year with a clear understanding of how can we be more inclusive and what does it mean. So you will see on the screen, but I just want to discuss, and we're going to go through it. Diversity is wide. It's not just linked to ethnicity and race. There is diversity in terms of origin and political levels and power and physical ability and standards, etc. It's a wide array that we will go in today. But then again, I want to also highlight equity. A lot of people have focused on equality, which basically means, okay, you have a cake, you cut up the cake, and each person gets a cut of the cake. Where equity actually means that we do understand that it means recognizing that we don't all start out of the same starting blocks. We don't start out of the same place, and we must acknowledge and make adjustments for those imbalances to create true equity. And then inclusion, I think most of you are familiar with inclusion because you all do it with your workforce, you all do it with projects. But inclusion is actually empowering people to be part of the program. And I think here, Shelley and her work, and Tom at SAICI as well, has set such wonderful examples in terms of empowerment, of working with communities, working with workforce, building the skills of women, of youth, etc., in the various areas that we're working in, not just professional as engineers, but also in STEM, creating awareness about, for example, maths and science, and building this as a career, but then also for other specialists, because we have a wide range of specialists that could be included in our projects. That includes environmentalists, social specialists, as well as financial transaction advisors, for example. And with this, I want to actually give you an example. A lot of people have previously used the example, but if you're going to a party, diversity means everybody is allowed to come. Equity means you're not just inviting everybody to come, but you're making sure that everybody has transport, everybody has whatever they need, the dress, the shoes, have done classes to dance, etc., so that they do not feel exposed or vulnerable during that. And then inclusion, on the other hand, is no, we're not just inviting you to the party. We want you to be part of the committee. As Shelley has said, become a member, join, make a difference, mentor. And I think that is what is important. Within a project context, because I know we're not going to a party and we're really looking within the project context. If you look at the picture that I have of a solar PV plant, there you would say diversity is if you include all the stakeholders, if you have local content, if you have a local workforce working in collaboration with expats that bring different skills and knowledge. But then equity would be, what are the programs you're putting in place? What are the skills transfer, empowerment, community, sustainable development projects, etc., that you are impacting with, so that in the end, they are able to operate and contribute at the same level as their fellow workers or fellow community members, and have a higher chance of absorbability in the workforce or becoming entrepreneurs. And then inclusion would be to not just acknowledge people and have them work, but as I said, to later become co-owners, co-shareholders, and to develop in that process. So I think most of us are familiar with the diversity, equity, and inclusion definition. So I wanted to touch a point that a lot of people say it's a hot topic. Here, why are you talking about unconscious biases? And I think it's so important because often when we do a project, whether it's an energy project, whether it's transport, whether we are looking at the Richards Bay master planning and considering various aspects around the ports, all of these engagements, whether I go or one of my team members go, different people have unconscious biases. And I think one of the first elements, if you are trying to ensure that you address your biases, is to become aware of them. So we need to look at our own attitudes, and how does our own attitudes around stereotypes affect our understanding and additions, and and basically our decisions in a very unconscious manner. And we also need to look at how we engage with other people are impacting those people. And then we need to look at how can we ensure that we don't have unintentional discrimination. So let's just get to the fun parts. I want to talk about diversity. And how can we, when we are engaging with stakeholders, and I want to remind you that when we talk about stakeholders, it's wider stakeholders in terms of your lenders and financiers, your project sponsors. You are talking about key government authorities, you're talking about industry bodies, but then you're talking about your workforce and contractors and their workforce, and you're also talking about the community at large. And then you will have specific project affected people. So I want to just stop and pause and maybe just look at gender identity as a first. So in this images, you can see that there are different people, and we would on the face decide, oh, this is a male, this is a female. And I think there is a lot more awareness around the fact that everybody does not necessarily associate with the same identity that you may think that you see. And I think it's very important. People are now referring to he, she, they are adding it on their emails. And I think it's very important that when you respond to a client, when you respond to a stakeholder, that you are considering that you are using their gender identity that they associate with. So I think that is very important, that in your engagements with the community, that you respect people's personal choices. Then I think intergenerational. When we look at projects, if I look back in my career over the last 20 years, we've often seen that there is a wide range of engagement with adults, but we all, in one of my best projects, I know Marlene, I think in my first project with her 20, 23, 24 years ago, we had a talk and I mentioned to her that, but your next generation users are the youth and children. So if we only engage with adults, we actually lose out a large portion of the population or end users. That was a specific water project in Soweto. And it's so important to look wider than, okay, but in terms of our process, we've only always invited adults. We don't need to engage children. But if you want to leave a living legacy, if you want to really have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive development, it's important to understand all the stakeholders. So consider age, consider intergenerational engagements, make sure that you engage the elderly that are bringing wisdom and different viewpoints and legacies and experience and institutional knowledge of what has happened in the area. But then also bring the working adults, bring your youth, bring entrepreneurs, bring students, and try to have a blended approach in terms of who you are engaging to just make that more inclusive. Another unconscious bias is what we found, and I think coming from Africa, we sometimes see it at conferences, when we travel to Europe, for example, or Australia, that sometimes there is a perception that, oh, you come from Africa, what do you know? Until we are able to share the extent and the projects and the levels and the work that we do. So my recommendation to you is to not bring that unconscious bias to your work. We have often seen that highly skilled people. I have, for example, led a whole team from a university, I won't name and shame, a whole academic team that I've taken to a rural setting at one stage on another water project. And they were really just not open to working with participatory rural appraisal because they just felt, but, you know, what are these people going to bring? And when we were able to show that there is this institutional knowledge, coping mechanisms that you do not even understand in an urban setting that is happening in a rural environment, we were able to have an inclusive development where they were able to share their local inherent knowledge. And I think if you want to work on projects, you need to be conscious of your biases and make sure that you bring in local and global team members, but that also have an understanding of rural and urban contexts. Then race and ethnicity, I think we are all, if we look at diversity, a lot of us by default think of race and ethnicity first, but inherently that brings us together. I specifically use this photo because I really love Nelson Mandela's Rainbow Nation context. And I think it's very important that when we engage on projects as well, that we have a diverse team that can bring different viewpoints, different backgrounds, and different cultural aspects into the mix so that you can understand from different cultures what would it mean. We were recently working on a project for a client, and we did a feasibility study in terms of additional offices that they wanted to expand. And I think they wanted at least 8 new offices. And we were able to bring in cultural aspects and aspects around what works within different communities. Should there be, for example, a prayer room, etc. So I think when you do development, if you want to be inclusive, you have to get voices from different people as well. And I think here it's also important to consider other aspects relating to culture in terms of making sure that there's a chance find procedure, etc., for heritage sites and shrines, etc. Then sexual orientation, LGBTQA+. I'm very proud to have heard from Transnet that Transnet has rolled out a whole campaign to rebrand and relook at all their documentation, all their flyers, their posters, their web information, to be inclusive, to show diverse people with diverse backgrounds, and to also show that they have no prejudice regarding sexual orientation. But I must say, of many of my clients, I think Transnet is leading in that area, where they feel that they have to address it, they have to show visible support, that their team members feel they can be who they are. Then disability, I'm sure most of you know that I have a hearing disability, but I just want to say that despite disabilities, there's such a lot of value that you can add through your development. We had engaged with a lady in a wheelchair, and she was explaining that there's so many buildings in Cape Town, in Cairo, in New York that have a ramp. You know, they did universal designs as civil engineers, and they thought, but this is a ramp, I've done the ramp, this is fantastic, it's all done. But when they actually try to go up the ramp, they need support because of the angle, and the angle did not align to the codes, and it's not conducive for people with a disability to go up by themselves or unassisted. And then you've actually defaulted that design. And also I want to mention that, for example, a botanical garden had signs up. It was lovely that the botanical garden had roots and little braille signs for blind people or visually impaired people. And then when the blind persons wanted to read it and they hold their hands up to read it, they found that the braille was actually at such a position that you have to read it upside down, so it doesn't work in practice. So it's those small things that if you really want to be inclusive and you really want to consider universal design, that you can look at what are the accommodations, how can you enhance it, can you have screens with better reading, do you have voice prompts, etc. Then religion, I think it's very important when we do stakeholder engagement to not have meetings at a time of prayer or when it is a religious public holiday. Some projects I understand now have, even from an authorization process, been delayed because the communities and the stakeholders could indicate, but we were not properly informed, or these meetings were held on a Friday, or it was held in a public holiday, or a weekend of public holidays linked to a religious festivity, or even during Ramadan or Eid, where people are fasting. So when you do development, please just consider all the different religions and how the different religions are in different phases of their calendar, so that, for example, you don't have 5 compulsory meetings for a project briefing, for example, with refreshments, etc., or during Ramadan when people are actually fasting in the office. Then socioeconomic standing. We see increasingly that there is biases around socioeconomic standing. Community members would come into meetings to engage, and then the person that arrives in the biggest, flashiest car may be treated differently than it is a rural community member that have just arrived with public transport. So I think it's very important that we also look at those unconscious biases. Then physical appearance. A lot of you have indicated, and in the calls that I've had before the webinar, that no, we don't look at physical appearance. Everybody is welcome in our offices, everybody is welcome on our projects, and we are inclusive. But we have increasingly see that, especially with the youth, you know, the hair can be pink, it can be purple, you can have dreadlocks, and to what extent do you have an open culture in your organization and within your projects to not select somebody that is more traditional, more classic, versus somebody that may be a fantastic engineer, but that look more modern or may not have your bias? Another bias that we've seen, not just on projects, but in the workforce and in communities, is that people may be judged by size and shape and fitness levels. So I think it's very important that we always bring in wellness and health, and fitness is very important, but considering your entire team. For example, I'm not going to send a 65-year-old member with walking mobility impairment to Namibia on a site visit where she's going to be expected to walk X kilometers. So I think it's very important that we just consider those as well. And then the last one is body socialization and piercings. I think we've seen the trend emerging and increasingly emerging that more and more people have body piercings and tattoos. So I think it's very important that if we are going to be inclusive, that we are also ensuring that we don't just not recruit somebody or appoint somebody on a project based on body socialization. And then lastly, language. I love the fact that in South Africa, we now have sign language as an official language, but please, I cannot tell you how many projects I'm still working on where the clients are only working in English, where it should have been translated to Swahili or another local language, or just consider that as well, or at least 2 local languages, to make sure your documentation and your information is available. So I think it's very important, just as we wrap that section up, to consider our own unconscious biases, and to just remember that, let's go back to the 2 girls I mentioned right in the beginning. We had Marlene and we had myself. And there could be, if we look at similar aspects of the identities, there's various levels of power, there's different levels of privilege, there's different societal hierarchy and systematic oppression. But it's very important to note that there is a background, and that there are various historical biases and systematic biases that different people have to face, and that they have faced various aspects of oppression in this roadmap that we have gone through. Now, I think this is basically what most of you want to know. How do we practically enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion in infrastructure development? So I want to just basically stop here. For example, if we look at mining, you could decide, okay, well, I'm going to assist a mining company. It could be a diamond mining company, etc., or it could be a coal mining company, or no, I could be supporting on an agricultural project. I think when we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's very important to look what is neighboring that specific facility. What is the community? not just from a stakeholder perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. For example, if I'm working in Rwanda, I cannot, or even Uganda, I cannot ignore the gorillas. I need to engage with the various bodies that are working with the wildlife support and conservation. If I'm working on a marine project, on various ports, or even when we establish a facility, like a LNG facility, and establish a port for that carriers to come in, we need to engage, for example, with the local fishermen, with the local community members as well. So that is part of your inclusion. Then, if we look at our stakeholders, I think it is important. Let's say we were working on a project where we are going to establish various warehouses, and we're going to have packaging and processing for an agricultural production. We will need to consider, for example, the landowners, the farmers that have maybe lived on this project for years. We may need to consider the children, the community, the different entrepreneurs that are supplying in the community that could support. And we could even look at the different people in the neighboring community, because there's often cumulative impact. We don't often consider that within that agricultural community, there may also be a wider mining community. And then how do we cross-pollinate that? Do we look at sorry, I'm just working on agriculture, I'm not going to look wider, or am I actually going to look wider at mining as well? Am I going to look at what can I do jointly? Because if I put my X million a year together with the X million of mining, could I not enhance impact? Could I not have a more sustainable project? And I think then with inclusive engagement, most of the calls that I've had before the webinar was relating specifically to, but how are we going to ensure inclusive engagement? A lot of times people saying, I have limited budget, I have to have 1 or 2 meetings, it doesn't really meet the criteria, but this is what we can do. And I would really, really recommend that you all take time to adequately go through the engagement process, to not just focus on the authorities and key stakeholders, but to break it down to a grassroots level and to engage and to use different tools and formats. I mean, here we are in different countries at the moment working on teams. But apart from working on teams, we are fortunate that we can work with sticky notes and workshops and in person, and that we can engage. I mean, we've had meetings where we put sticky notes and posters on cars or on trees because it was a rural setting. But I think there's so many engagement resources and tools that you can use to enhance your engagement, that I would really recommend that is a first step in ensuring that you have more inclusive development. This comes back to my final comment about the project objectives and timelines and budget and impact. We all have a target. We all have deadlines. There's a project we have to build a road from X to Z, or repair, or we need to establish a CSP plant, or we need to build a 10-story high-rise building. But if we don't consider diversity, equity, inclusion, and how can we get the best workforce, the best contractors that maybe have preferential procurement or Black empowerment or youth empowerment, how are we bringing those role players in? Because every decision we make will impact this project. You have a fantastic opportunity at the start of the project, when you are still doing the timeline, when you are still establishing everything, to look at, I mean, if we just look at this diagram with the squiggles and the different pieces of yarn, just bringing it together, you are in a position often where you can influence, create awareness. A lot of people have come to me and said, but Thea, I create awareness, but it's not working. But sometimes it takes time to build that relationship with a client to say, this is wonderful. You have set a target of 20% or 30% or 50% local content content and employment of local people. But can we define that? Can we be clear on how much of that percentage will go to women and how much will go to disabled and how much will be going to youth? And I think that is so important that we can then bring it together. And when we look at the community projects as well, so that it's not just the quickest, easiest throwing money at something, but that we look at sustainability, we look at what can be truly valuable. What are the greatest needs and assets already developed around youth? What are the greatest needs and assets developed around the elderly, or healthcare, or specific care in terms of sexual reproductive rights, or gender-based violence and harassment? So I think if you take a moment, you are able to then step away and to look at these project objectives and to say, I have a budget, I am going to spend X on the whole project infrastructure, and I have a marginal budget in terms of the development and community prescribed amount. But how can I leverage each decision in terms of employment, in terms of the contractors we employ, in terms of the contractor control plans? What can I put into that contractor contract to stipulate, but this is the local content, this is the empowerment, this is the skills transfer that you have to do. And then how are you going to monitor it? Many of the engineering companies that we've been working with and clients have indicated, but Thea, we battle with monitoring and evaluation, and that is what I absolutely love. To come and to tell the stories, to be able to collect quantitative data and qualitative data, to celebrate that journey. Because if you're empowering your workforce and your community, it is going to have multiplier impacts in future, because their children will be in a better position with education, opportunities, and this will grow exponentially. So I wanted to just close off with 4 project examples before I allow an opportunity for comment. And I would really today love to also hear your views, Shelley, with your permission, in terms of your projects and project examples. So this is a lovely project in Malawi, and which is really great that we have some people from Malawi that have joined. This is in Kota Kota. It's about 2 hours from Lilongwe. And here what we did is, it would have been very easy for the client to say, well, this is the project, we establishing infrastructure, it is what it is. But there was such a lovely collaboration with the local community in terms of enhancing what they are working at, and also seeing how can we empower youth. And various youth were selected for various training programs. For example, as you can see, there was a lady that did tailoring. And some of the women came back to me afterwards and they indicated, but Thea, previously I was a single, unmarried mom. So I'm a single parent, I had no income, and I was really ostracized and marginalized in my community. I had no value. But now that I've done this training, and with the training, we gave the tools and the resources, they have machines, they have fabric, they have yarn. They are now making school uniforms. They are making dresses for the chief. They are making wedding dresses. They are making just everyday clothing and bedding and curtains. And suddenly that person that didn't have a voice in the community is uplifted and are able to now empower the next generation of tailors, and are able to take her family and her children to the next level, because she's now able to afford schooling, and are able to provide food and shelter for her children as well. We also did, for example, electrical training, where people are now wiring homes, wiring different buildings, assisting with repair, and also welding. And then in another aspect, they were also doing carpentry, because it's such a remote area. Transport is always a challenge. And tables, chairs that we, for example, take for granted, and beds, it's very difficult to get there, where a lot of the community is depending on walking or cycling, and the public transport is really limited and very expensive. So all of these projects in the end leave a legacy behind in terms of where we are going. Another example of inclusive development that I just want to highlight is, for example, in Gauteng and Tshwane, the IRing project, where it was a rapid bus transit project. And at that stage, when I spoke to Marlene, there was different route alignments, and we wanted to look at how can this be more inclusive? How do we do a development that is considering the social fabric and baseline of the community? And there what we did is we really ground truthed. We got boots on the ground. We spent time in the community. We surveyed, we collected data, and we were able to give hotspots in terms of where access and children and pedestrian traffic will be higher. Also where there's a higher concentration of disabled people or elderly people with mobility impairments, we were able to identify crime hotspots with the South African police and areas of potential crime that we should rather avoid. And this is just an example of how to then take diversity, equity, inclusion, but apply it within a project that you could see the benefit to the community where you've considered their diverse backgrounds. Then I want to also give an example of the Middle East. And here, for example, it was an LNG plant that was constructed with a pipeline to extract the natural gas. And then it was the liquefaction plant in the Gulf of Aden. And then, of course, the LNG carriers had to come in and out. And a lot of people, indicated, but there's no engagement. What is happening? And we said, no, this is not going to work. We have to do proper stakeholder engagement, not just with the key stakeholders, but with the entire route, with the entire pipeline route. But we need to include the youth, which is the next generation users, but we also need to include, for example, the beekeepers, the fishermen. So here, for example, we were able to have fish aggregation devices in a different area, so that fish aggregation devices then attract fish, and the local fishermen actually had higher yields and higher harvest in the end of fish catching in the end. So the project was really a benefit to the local community. But should we have said, oh, well, this is being established, we're not aware of Bedouin travel, people traveling in the Marab Desert, that maybe have seasonal access to fishing or to different areas where they have beehives, we would have absolutely missed this. So when you do development, please do stakeholder engagement at that level. And I think my second last example is Swaziland. Yeah, many years ago, I was working extensively in Swaziland on the Lower Lesotho Smallholders Irrigation Project. It started as the Skip Komati Project Enterprise, the Swaziland Komati Project Enterprise. And when we did engagement and planned for resettlement of an entire community away from the dam, away from this infrastructure and compensating them, the community indicated, but we want to be smallholders. We want to be small-scale farmers, and can you train us? And out of that Lower Lesotho Smallholder Irrigation Project was birthed, and we were able to then include them, not resettle them, and actually develop an entire program where they receive technical training. Here is a flagship project. I'm sure many of you have attended some of the infrastructure in Davos where the president has highlighted this. This is Redstone in Daniel Scale in the Northern Cape in Southern Africa. Here again, it's fantastic. It's a concentrated solar plant with about 60,000 mirrors. Here we just wanted to highlight that again, that asset-based community development was used, where we considered other projects in terms of food security, food gardens, need for literacy, need for computer literacy, and that was worked into the program. So I would love to hear from you, but before I conclude, I think in the way forward, I want to really ask you and ask every one of you on this webinar whether DEI, whether diversity, equity, inclusion is actually a vision that you're still aspiring to, or is it really part of your ethos? Is it part of your organization already? Because I want to challenge you. I think Shelley said earlier today, WITBE's webinars is a call to action. We all want you to, at the end of each webinar, think differently, act differently. So this is a call to action. So for 2024, we really want you to consider each choice, because each choice matters and every decision has consequences. And you could actually enhance significant impact in the built environment if you're just aware of the different aspects that you should consider and how to be more inclusive and how to make a difference as a project. So from my side, I would now love to have comments. Shelley, if that is possible.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really interesting that you touched on some really important points and how the little things count and how semantics count. Words that we use like equity, equality, we use regularly, but understanding the differences, the actual detail behind that is so important for everyone to understand. So thanks for pointing that out. There are some questions. Tom, maybe you'll read out some of the questions in the chat, but I'd like to open it up to the group. Anybody on the line that would like to ask Thea a question, please put your hand up or put your camera on. I'd like cameras on anyway, but we'll do that at the end of the questions. Josephine, go ahead.
Hi, Sid. I'm sorry I can't do my camera right now, but I just wanted to commend Thea so much for a wonderful talk, because in my research, I found that community inclusion, it's usually at a superficial level. It's more like a tick box exercise. And I was really encouraged to see how she's able to show the real inclusion, in terms of including the local community when you're making a development and with real examples. I think this is very encouraging. It shows that it can be done. So for me, it's not necessarily a question, but a comment, and just to say thank you so much for showing us what really inclusion, diversity, and all those things mean. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Josephine. I appreciate it.
No, that's great. And is there anyone on the webinar that would like to share a story or an actual project where this demonstrates, as the examples that Thea gave, of this kind of activity? Anybody got any examples for us? Tom, you know of any examples? Kim, I think you're on the line. Do you have any examples? Just raise your hand. I'd love to hear from you.
Shelley, let me start off with a question for Thea. It's from now I've lost it. Very, very good facilitator here. Oh, there it is. It's from Leanne. It says, in terms of addressing others using gender, the he, she, they, which was mentioned, what's the acceptable rule of engagement? It isn't something we inquire about upfront. I assume it is learned over time. Is there a generic way to deal with this so we do not offend someone unintentionally?
Yes, so I think it really depends on the setting. So when you are responding to email, that person would at the bottom of the email in their signatory already identify how they want to be addressed, whether it's dear sir, dear ma'am, dear, Mrs. So-and-so, etc. So just to be conscious of that. But then when you are in a meeting as well, to just be inclusive. And I try to, as much as possible, to when we are in a larger public meeting or in a group, to talk about stakeholders, because stakeholders are inclusive. Or I would talk about groups of stakeholders. For example, I would talk about the youth. where we talk about the elderly, or if there's a specific interest group, let's say everybody is conservationists or everybody is into biodiversity, I would say, could all our biodiversity specialists please stay behind for a discussion? So, and within an informal setting like that, we often just talk to the person's name. You know, there would be name cards. Marlene and I are really a stickler for name cards. I know most companies don't do name cards anymore because it saves the environment, and we all have virtual tags at the moment. But we have found that a name tag creates that opportunity for a person to show who they want to be identified with, whether it's Shelley, whether it's Thea, whether it's Marlene, whether it's Kim, whether it's Tom. You know, you can address them directly on their name. We're not really in that formal setting anymore where people are constantly wanting to be Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. I have found it somewhat a little bit still in Nigeria and Ghana and Kenya, where there is still a lot of formality. But in most of our engagements, people are comfortable if you just use their name. Thanks, Leanne, for the question.
And then, Shell, there is a comment from Milani herself requesting Thea to please share with the audience their company's diversity share moment that they introduced at MPAMOT and promote extensively. I'm not sure why they put you under the bus there, Thea, but it is what it is. It's a boss's prerogative.
Lovely. And I'm driving it, but you know, what is really lovely, and I know of many companies that are doing at the moment. 20 years ago, when we all worked in sustainability and development, there was a huge drive towards health, safety, and the environment. So every meeting would start with a health and safety toolbox talk or a minute of health and safety. What we've done at MPAMOT is we started with a diversity, equity, and inclusion minute. So we still have the health and safety minute, but every meeting we have, regardless of the size of the team or whether it's the board, starts with a diversity minute. And I would strongly encourage you, lots of my clients now when we arrive, we have a health and safety minute and a diversity minute. It's so lovely to be able to share, but you know, this is what's happening. Have an open mic, have a moment where people can share their journeys if they want to share longer. But often it is about a festival, an award, a concept, or unconscious bias that may have happened in a previous engagement that now comes to the fore that you can address in a safe space. Great suggestion.
Thanks, Thea. That's great. Leanne, you still have your hand up. Would you like to ask another question?
No, I just want to make you asked for examples of projects. So it's not
Yes.
a big thing, but it is a small example on one of the Sandral projects. Where you would normally, you know, for skills transfer, do things like block paving, you know, employ labor in labor intensive construction and things. We also set aside a budget for driver's learner's license and driver's licenses that benefited the community as well. So, you know, as well. So they didn't have to be employed as construction workers. But so we reached a larger group that way as well, and left them with something for the future. Yeah.
Thanks,
That is
Leanne.
really
Wonderful.
lovely. Sorry, Shelley. That is really lovely, Leanne, because I know of many projects that are now realizing, although you have labor-intensive construction, there's a wider community that may not be able to do construction for various reasons. And I love the fact that you're giving them driver's licenses, because a driver's license already puts you 5 steps ahead to your fellow community member that's applying for a job, because it gives you that mobility. You can drive, you can courier. It just opens your career path. So well done.
Shell, there's another observation from Tundi in response to Thea highlighting Transnet's initiatives. She says, yes, Thea, correct. I'm from Transnet, and this is what I really liked. It's a revolution here in the company.
That's remarkable. I love the fact that there's a revolution. But I must also say that they did it right. They did proper DEI assessment, they ground truth. What is the reality on the ground? A lot of people are saying, we want to implement various diversity, equity, inclusion aspects in our company, but they don't want to look at the reality. And I always say, even if you start at a negative, even if you start at a bad point, you can only go upwards. You know, so I think it's very important that you do those surveys, that you engage with people like myself or whoever's on the call that is familiar with DEI surveys, and really get specialists to come in, engage with your workforce, and establish those records so that you know what the red flags are, so that you know what the unconscious biases are, because often people don't realize it, and it often doesn't come out in a public forum.
Thanks, Thea. And also it's quite important, you know, that's one of the themes on the WITBE app, and discussion can take place there around these kinds of topics, and I sort of encourage everyone to share them there. There've been a couple of questions around downloading the app. Just in terms of that, it's a confidential space, it's a safe space, so you have to be registered with us. You have to register on the program. We have to upload you onto the back end, onto what we call the headquarters. Once you've been approved, you will get sent an email, and that will give you the link to the app, where you'll get a one-time password to join the community. So that's the way it works. It's not downloaded off the App Store. It's a progressive web app, and you would need to register. So if anybody on the call, please make sure you register first, and Louise will send you the email and the link to download the app. Anyone that's got any challenges with that, please let Louise or I know. We will always there to help you. And please keep in mind, we've cleared all the scores on the platform. It's back to zero. We'll be monitoring it carefully over the next 3 to 4 months, because as you know, we're going to be bringing out our top women to London. I'm a judge and panelist on the European WISE Awards, which is the Women in Construction and Engineering, and it's probably the most prestigious program across the world in terms of construction engineering, and it's a very prestigious award. So if you want to be part of that, you need to be engaging, you need to be sharing, you need to be helping others on the app, answering questions, guiding, and that's what it's really about. It's about building trust, building your network, and sharing information in a very safe and secure environment. So let me encourage you to do that. And if you've got any questions around that, obviously just drop Louise an email. Louise, perhaps you can just pop your email into the chat as well. And then just to end off, if we could do a photograph, who's ever happy to put their cameras on. I know you've got sort of oh, there we go. Got challenges with load shedding, etc. Hi, Joy. There's Joy Alvina. Hi. Hi, Kim. Wonderful. Let's get some more people online. Louise, will you do a nice group photo when we've got some more people up? Hi, Melanie. Let's get you in there.
Sorry, Tom, I think yours comes out better than mine. I don't know why. Can you take it first, please?
Is Tom the better photographer?
Yes, definitely.
I've already done one, but we need some more cameras. Let me
We've
get
got
rid of my
Milani
camera.
with the whole team behind her. Hi. Got everyone at MPAMOT. Wonderful. Thanks, Melanie. Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody. Please keep in touch, get involved, get onto the app. And if you've got any ideas or contributions you'd like to share with me, anything you think I've missed or we need to add into this project, let me know. And then further on in the year, we will be linking with international mentors from across Europe and the UK. So keep that in mind. Thank you, Thea. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for your input, the time that you've given us. It's so appreciated. I know how busy you are and how you've been rushing around, and your time is sincerely appreciated. So thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.